So this piece of Nidacore is going to be a tabletop that goes over the new air conditioner. It's got one layer of the lightweight surfboard fiberglass cloth on each side, and it also has the edge covered with strips of chopped strand mat on 3 of the 4 sides. So it's been glassed over already, and I've sanded the top, and right now I'm just going through. It's been wiped down once with acetone, but it's been moved in here. This is the epoxy that I'm going to use for the final coat. It's countertop epoxy. There's a whole series of videos on YouTube by Stone Coat Countertops for using this with various kinds of colors added to it. I'm trying to do something a little special here and a bit more difficult. I want to use the clear epoxy to make a glossy finish on this tabletop, but I don't want to put any coloring in it. I want to be able to see the honeycomb core pattern through the glass. And I've noticed this in other projects, that when I put fiberglass on this, the glass and the resin have the same refractive index and become very transparent, letting me look right through to the honeycomb core. So instead of putting white gel coat over the top, I'm just going to put the transparent resin. And this resin turned out to be a little bit more yellow than I would prefer for this application, but it creates an interesting effect anyway. The trowel that I'm using to spread the epoxy has notches in it. And that is used a lot of times for spreading adhesives or thin set before putting tiles down on a floor. And the notches let you get a very uniform thickness of a layer. A certain amount of stuff will go through the notches, and you'll scrape everything else ahead of the trowel. And if I was doing this correctly, I'd be holding the trowel more perpendicular to the surface, like I am right here. A lot of times I allow it to get a little bit flatter than it ought to. And I'm trying, on the first time around, I'm trying to spread it evenly over the entire surface without getting right up to the edge. I don't want epoxy flowing over the edge and being lost just yet. That happens at the final stage. But at the moment, I'm trying to get a very even layer of epoxy over the entire surface. So I'm pushing epoxy ahead of the trowel, letting some flow through the notches, the 1/8 inch notches in the trowel, which take up about 50% of the edge of the trowel is notch, and 50% is coming right down to the surface. So those 1/8 inch, once that levels, it should make a layer about 1/16 thick. Here, hopefully you can get a better view of the teeth at the edge of the trowel, the notches. So now I'm going to pour the epoxy onto the table and start spreading it with the trowel. It took me 2 half cups like that of epoxy to cover the tabletop. And a bit of a miscalculation on my part. If I had known, I would have mixed them both in advance and then put them on. But this epoxy takes quite a while to actually harden. So I've got it spread over the entire tabletop now, and as I go along, I'm letting some flow over the edge now. And that bit that flows over the edge, I'm going to come back with a brush and spread that all over the edge. Now, these 2 edges way over to the left, that doesn't have glass cloth over it, and that's cut at a funny bevel so that it matches the front of the fly bridge, which is where this is going to sit. So I'm trying not to let a bunch of resin flow over the side there, but here at this front edge I am, and on all the other 3 sides. You can kind of see by the reflection the way the resin smooths out and all those lines from the trowel kind of disappear. Although there are some bubbles still, tiny bubbles in the surface. So the way you get rid of the bubbles is with a torch. And you just, the flame just very briefly, barely touches the surface, and that will cause all those little bubbles to break, and then the surface will settle down to a very glossy finish. Now, it's safe to do this with this countertop epoxy. You do not want to try this if you've just laid, say, polyester resin or something on here, because that would go up like a puddle of gasoline. It was a little bit difficult for me to bring myself to actually hit this with the torch the first time. I had seen it done in the YouTube videos from Stone Coat Countertops, so I was aware that it wasn't going to just burst into flames, but it was not the easiest thing to do the first time. Also, this kind of torch is not the best. If you invert or turn sideways that tank of propane, when it's full, maybe it's not so bad, but as it starts to empty, then the pickup tube in the tank sucks gas instead of liquid propane, or vice versa. And like I said, with a full tank it acts like this, but pretty soon it's going to flame out on me. And so I'm going to switch to a different torch that I had for preheating stuff with a welder. This is as the bubbles start to pop, and I've still got a while to go. And apparently I didn't have the surface sealed as good as I could have, and more bubbles came up. And at the moment, I'm taking this brush and just going along the edge where epoxy had been allowed to flow over the edge of the table and down the side. And I'm just evening that out. And so now that some more bubbles have emerged, I'm using this better torch. This one has sort of a hose between the propane tank and the torch head. So I can hold the propane tank upright and let the flame run over the surface of the epoxy. And again, this just pops any little tiny bubbles that are on the surface. And you don't want to let the flame dwell in any one spot for any length of time. Just the briefest touch will cause the bubbles to pop, and then the surface will settle down and become very glass-like. And now that I'm through with that, I'm going to clean up my trowel and any other tools that I want to keep and reuse. And clean up is just the way it is with the polyester resin, is clean up with paper towel and acetone. And here I've worked several steps before getting to this point, and left quite a mess behind. I have to put the cap on and tighten the cap on the polyester resin. And this is the acetone. It's a good solvent for cleaning up polyester resin or epoxy. It dissolves it pretty good, and so you can clean up your tools, which is what I'm doing right now with the notched trowel. This countertop epoxy is, I would say, a little bit more viscous and a little bit more sticky than polyester resin. But a little bit of acetone and a paper towel and it cleans up just fine. And here I am out at the boat. That box there is the duct for the new air conditioner. It's a window air conditioner, and it blows into that white box there in the foreground. And that opens to the overhead hatch above the sofa in the cabin. And I'm putting a bunch of thickened polyester resin on the places where the tabletop will contact these two supports and the front of the fly bridge. And I'm just very carefully positioning the tabletop, trying not to get any resin on the glossy top surface. And once that's in place, now I go and wipe off any excess thickened resin that is being smushed out from the places where this is contacting its supports. Again, just a little bit of acetone on a paper towel seems to thin it where the towel touches and helps with wiping up the excess. And it has actually sprinkled a little bit of rain while I've been doing this. So now that I'm through, I put my acetone away. And you can tell that this is really new. And I'm actually wiping the raindrops off. since this time, it has sat out in storms and rain and has accumulated a lot of dust and stuff.